let's recap what I'm doing. I have this mid-range Zoom H2 microphone. I use it for recording some solo pieces, but I really bought it for recording at the community and school orchestras I help at. It has a microphone array, which is good for capturing ambient sounds like a full orchestra. But the best place to position it is generally right at the front of the audience or where the conductor stands. As such, it's not very convenient to start and stop recording. I can't really walk out from the string section between songs and physically press the start and stop button. In the past, I've generally just pressed record before the concert starts, paused it at the interval, and then stopped it after the concert has finished. But it's a bit annoying doing that, and it's not foolproof. I could ask the conductor to start and stop it, but they generally have other things on their mind, like greeting the audience. And if they forget, it's not ideal either. So what it needs is a remote control. And in fact, it does have this 2.5mm jack port on the side into which you can plug a remote control. It's a 4-wire interface for serial communication with a protocol. So it's not just a SPSF switch. And this is the official remote control. It has a big red button to start and stop recording, and it shows a red LED when it's recording and a flashing LED when the recording is paused. But for some maddening reason, the stock remote control for this is wired. So I'd need to trail meters of cable between the orchestra and the conductor's stand for this to be any use. It was a bit of a surprise that there's not a wireless remote on the market for this, but I found online a few other enterprising hackers who'd set out on a similar path to me and already reverse engineered the serial protocol for this device. My initial plan was to build a parasitic wireless transceiver, and I wanted to use the Tiny 2040 microcontroller. And I'm going to use that with a TSOP IR receiver to listen for button presses from an IR remote control. And the Tiny 2040 would be wired into a 2.5mm jack and be able to plug into, communicate with, and control the recording on the H2. In this approach, the IR remote would have its coin cell battery, and the Tiny 2040 based transceiver would be powered by the 3 volts coming through the 2.5mm jack, ultimately powered by the 2AA batteries in the H2. If you saw my previous video, you'll have seen me do an experiment to find out what the current draw for the Tiny 2040 was, so I could check I could power it in this way. Well, it turns out I made a mistake. I have this circuit set up where the Tiny 2040 is drawing power from 2AA batteries with a multimeter in series. And when I do this, the Tiny 2040 is drawing about 25 milliamps, which makes sense because if you look at the datasheet for the RP2040 chip, that idles at about 20 milliamps. The important thing is this is an order of magnitude off from the measurements I took previously for the time lapse. And I wasn't previously worried about the power supply for this, but now it warrants further analysis. So here we have a circuit which allows me to vary and measure the current flow. Here, the H2 is providing the power via its 2.5mm jack socket. I have a tack switch that I press to complete the circuit. The LED is powered with a B5K potentiometer providing variable current limiting, and the multimeter is in series to show the current that's being drawn. As I dial down the resistance provided by the potentiometer, the LED glows slightly brighter. With this, it's possible to establish that the maximum current draw with 0 resistance from the H2 is limited to 10 milliamps. So I cannot power an RP2040 chip from the limited current coming out of the H2. I can't build the parasitically powered device that I wanted. So now I need a plan that involves a powered transceiver, batteries, and on-off switch. The capacity of, for example, CR2032 coin cell is typically around 225 milliamp hours, and that would allow the Tiny to run for about 10 hours. And there are small rechargeable LiPo batteries, which typically have between 150 milliamps and 500 milliamp hours, depending on their size. and that would allow the Tiny to run for between 6 and 20 hours. So I pondered which of these options I might go for, and I'm still undecided between the two options, so I'm going to try them both. I'd prefer to use a LiPo rechargeable battery, but to do that I'll need to make concessions on the size of the device I'm building. Even small LiPos are quite big, or at least compared to the Tiny 2040. The smallest I have in stock is 150 milliamp hours, which is still bigger than the Tiny. Plus, since it's rechargeable, I'll also need to have a way to charge it. And using an external LiPo charger really means having a JST connector, so I can connect and disconnect the battery from the Tiny. And since the power is no longer controlled by the H2, I'll also need to add an on-off switch. Because the Tiny is so bare bones, it doesn't have a JST socket, or battery charging support, or even an enable pin. I can add these features with a LiPo shim, but the shim is going to be as big as the Tiny. A more sensible option here might be to move away from the Tiny 2040 and to use something like an Adafruit 2040 Feather. Although it has a bigger footprint, it has LiPo charging, management and on-off all supported on the board. I just need to break out the USB-C port for charging it, and that's pretty convenient. As you can see from the picture, where things are approximately to scale, the Feather shown on the right is not larger than the Tiny and the shim put together. Checking the current draw for the Feather, it has a very similar 26 milliamp hour draw. Still needs its own power, it can't run from the H2, but it will run for just as long running on the Tiny LiPo battery. So that's one option I'm going to build out. Another option that might allow me to stick to using the Tiny is to use a disposable coin cell battery. So a CR2023 in an enclosure with a switch is a very similar size to the LiPo, but I could use that directly with the Tiny 2040. I wouldn't need to add the recharging port or another on-off switch. Plus it should run for 10 hours on a single coin cell. So that's another good option, and I'm going to prototype that too. So there will be future videos showing the progress on this. Thank you for watching and stay safe.